Welcome to today's webinar, brought to you by Premier Biotech. Today's presentation is entitled EtG Testing, an exciting alternative to traditional alcohol testing methods, and will be presented by Bill Current. We will now hear from Casey Mahalik of Premier Biotech.
Thank you, Jessica. So just to give a little bit of background about Premier Biotech, we are a U.S. manufacturer of point-of-care drugs of abuse tests as well as a laboratory. We're based in Minneapolis, Minnesota, established in 2009. We're really an R&D-driven organization. So when we take a look at our portfolio, obviously the topic of today and the newest item in our portfolio is our rapid EtG test. Before this was launched back in May, we went through extensive clinical studies just to make sure that we were bringing to market a product that we knew that there was a need for and that we knew worked. And really the feedback that we've gotten from our customers so far and the testimonials has been, the impact of having an instant on-site test for EtG and increase in admissions and being able to hold offenders accountable for alcohol use. So going and extending upon that, we were the first company to bring to market an instant on-site test for K2 or spice. Initially, we rolled that out as a single dip cassette. It's now available in multi-panel dips as well as integrated cups. Our real focus is on being a company that provides the most flexible and customizable testing menu, whether it be in our products or our laboratory services, and we'll talk about that a little bit more in the next slides here. When we refer to a zero tolerance or low cutoff levels, we've really seen in the criminal justice market a shift to these zero tolerance or more sensitive tests. So what we have done is created some lower cutoff levels that we are calling our zero tolerance panel, specifically for the criminal justice market to provide increased sensitivity and visibility into offender behavior. So if we just were to take a look at some of Premier Biotech's products on this slide here, again, our focus is on delivering a flexible and comprehensive testing menu. In addition to all of the standard drugs, we do include specialty drugs, so ketamine, buprenorphine, tramadol, K2, and spice. Our portfolio obviously includes oral fluid tests as well as our urine tests, so cups and dips, alcohol tests, as I mentioned, the synthetic test for K2 and spice. EtG, obviously the topic of discussion today. As of right now, it is available as a single dip cassette. We will be pending APPA in January, in which we will be releasing EtG in an integrated cup. So the ability to test for EtG simultaneously with several other drugs as well. In addition to being an R&D focused organization, we're also very IT focused. So we have a portal as well as a reader, which allows for our customers to automate test results and decrease the subjectivity of the test. And we passed the screen, but those were images on that previous slide there. So just looking here, and I know, okay. So this first image on the top is our oral fluid device, and then the image below that is our reader. So the Premier Tox Reader, what that does is that will hook right into a desktop. It has the ability to read cups as well as oral fluid tests. Something that this is used for is to, again, automate test interpretation. So instead of having someone on your team look and read those results manually, the reader will interpret those results for you. That ties into our web portal, which is our results management system. Something that makes our reader very unique is its ability to do a dynamic read. So what that means is that with previous readers in the past, and I think the one probably everyone's most familiar with is eScreen, but with other readers, it takes until let's say a duration of 10 minutes for those results to be available. With our reader, that will take a sequential image every 15 seconds. So as soon as the test results are visible, it will interpret them. So it can be a very fast process. So I know that there's a lot going on in this screen here, but over at the right, we have all of the drugs listed as well as cutoff level options. So again, our goal is to deliver the most flexible and comprehensive testing menu. So we are, being a U.S. manufacturer, we're able to customize tests to fit the specific and unique needs of our customers. So, for instance, one of the things that we've done is with our customers, with other vendors, they've been locked into specific configurations. So maybe they had 1 or 2 5-panel options, an 8-panel option, maybe a 10 and a 12. So what we wanted to do is take a look at which drugs they're testing for and make sure that they're testing for the most relevant combination of drugs. So we have some unique configurations that include a 5, 6, or 7 panel with buprenorphine or oxy, which we know are buprenorphine or Suboxone, I should say, which we know are on significant rise throughout the country. So we know that our customers' needs vary regionally as well as even within a state. So what we want to do is work with our customers to build custom panels to test for the specific drugs that are relevant to them, and again, offering the ability to have those zero tolerance or lower cutoff levels for increased sensitivity. So at this point, I'll turn it over to Bill, who's going to talk about the fun stuff and looking at EtG as a new method of alcohol testing.
All right, thank you very much, Casey, and welcome to everybody who's logged into today's webinar. We've got a big crowd. Happy holidays to everyone. We're going to talk about EtG testing, and as we launch into that, I want to just, and this is my favorite slide, that's why I'm paused on this one for a little while, but I want to just sort of set the stage. I think everybody who's logged into this is logged in because you're most likely in the criminal justice profession, you're a treatment professional, you're dealing with individuals on a regular basis, screening them for alcohol as part of a treatment program, as part of some type of detention program that they're in, and you already know some of this stuff. You know that alcohol is the #1 substance of abuse in the United States. You know that a large percentage of individuals who are convicted of very serious crimes were under the influence of alcohol at the time of the crime, whether it was homicide or rape or robbery, etc. And that alcohol testing of these individuals can be a very effective means of sort of keeping them accountable for their behavior as they go through either a treatment program, incarceration, etc. And there are lots of different ways that you can screen or test an individual for alcohol. I'm going to take you through some of the traditional means as a launch into EtG. Before I do that, though, and you're going to have access to these slides. So I'm going to take you through just a few slides that have some statistics about alcohol abuse in the United States. Thought maybe that might be helpful to you as you perhaps are putting your own presentations together, as you're justifying budget items in your programs, etc. To have these statistics available. They're pretty up to date. There's a study that comes out, and this will sort of set the stage for our discussion about alcohol testing. Now, there's a study that comes out every year from the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration, part of the Department of Health and Human Services, federal government. It's called the National Survey on Drug Use and Health. Again, we're going to send you a link to these slides, but you can see right there at the bottom of the screen, we've provided the link, the URL, so that you can go right to it and read this study if you'd like to. But it gives us an idea of, just how many people are drinking. And current drinkers are different than binge drinkers, who are different than heavy drinkers. And the government, in surveying individuals every year about their illicit drug use and their alcohol use, will categorize people in one of these different buckets here. So a current user is somebody who has had alcohol, they don't distinguish how much, in the last 30 days. And you can see it's a pretty big percentage. Slightly more than half of all Americans 12 and older admit to consuming alcohol in the last 30 days. Nearly a quarter of persons 12 and older were binge drinkers. That means they had at least 5 drinks on at least one occasion in the last 30 days. And this translates to nearly 60 million people. Heavy drinkers are those who admit to having at least 5 drinks on at least 5 occasions in the last 30 days. And that, again, is still a pretty significant number. 17 million people 6.5% of the population 12 and older. So it gives you a little bit of a feel for how many people are drinking. Now, I'm going to share a couple of slides that have to do with employment. I understand this is not a presentation necessarily geared toward the workplace market for alcohol testing, but I know that a lot of you in your professional endeavors are either requiring or maybe even helping people try to find jobs. And so I think these statistics are relevant to what you're doing. 64.3% of full-time employed adults admit to being current alcohol users. Again, that's somebody who admits to having alcohol at least once in the last 30 days. The rate of binge drinking among unemployed persons was higher than among full-time employed persons, and you can kind of maybe create a justification in your mind. You can see how that could be the case. Most binge and heavy alcohol users were employed in 2011. 74 among binge drinkers, 74.4% were employed either full or part-time, and 74.9% of heavy drinkers were employed either full or part-time. So these are individuals who, in the case of heavy drinkers, drink a lot, and they're able to, or they're jumping from one job to the next, but they're able to have some type of employment. That's important. Let's break it down by occupations. Now, I realize this is not always the case, and I don't mean to stereotype anybody, but lots of times when individuals in the types of situations that you're dealing with are looking for employment, not always, of course, I don't mean to stereotype again, but they're going to find jobs in the construction industry, in the food services industry, maybe in retail, and we see the levels of heavy alcohol use in these occupations that apply to those industries. 25.7% of roofers admit to being heavy alcohol users. Now, I'd be scared, of course. I don't even like to go up on my roof or anything, but to go up on my roof maybe under the influence of alcohol is really obviously asking for trouble. And if you're a roofer, if you're doing it professionally, then you can see that there could be significant risk there. Electricians, carpenters, people who work with floor coverings, carpets, installers, etc., construction laborers, other construction-related workers. Then you get to 15.2%, right, sort of in the middle of that chart, food and beverage servers and other food industry occupations, a number of different sales types of occupations. And then go all the way down, you see cooks at 11.9% and retail sales at 10.2%. Now, these are jobs that typically don't necessarily require a high school diploma or even a college education, and they're the kind of jobs sometimes the people you're working with can get or will try to pursue a job with. You need to know that they're going to be exposed to a fairly high percentage in some of these cases, individuals who are heavy alcohol users. And we're not talking here about just alcohol use, but we're talking about heavy alcohol use. And that's the environment in which they work. A few slides here on alcohol abuse and crime. These are from NCADD. This is 5.3 million adults. 36% of those under correctional supervision at the time were drinking at the time of their conviction offense. Excessive drinking leads to criminal behavior, according to this report. Department of Justice estimates the majority of criminal offenders were under the influence of alcohol alone, not other drugs, but alcohol alone when they committed their crimes. And 40% of convicted murderers being held in either jail or state prison, alcohol was a factor in the homicide. Now, again, a lot of you are in the criminal justice field. You're professionals. You deal with this all the time. You know these stats. Now you have them just in case you didn't, and the source that they come from. And as you saw on that previous slide, let me see if I can pull that up again. Yes, we provided the URL for these statistics. This would be the same URL for these statistics on this page. Just take a look there. 3 million violent crimes occur each year in which victims perceive the offender to have been drinking, and then look at the types of offenses. 37% of rapes and sexual assaults, 15% of robberies, 27% of aggravated assaults, and 25% of simple assaults. Again, you see the URL at the bottom of the page. If you want to look up any of these, obviously feel free to do so. And I'm not going to go through each of these statistics-related slides, again, because I know you deal with these things on a regular basis. I just want to point out a couple of things I've underlined there, but if you go to the third bullet, 70% of alcohol-related incidents of violence occur in the home with greatest frequency at 11 p.m. Interesting statistics. DWI-related issues. We know that driving under the influence of alcohol is a major problem in the United States, and nearly 1.4 million people are arrested for a DWI each year, and 780,000 are convicted. Those are pretty astounding numbers. I want to pause on this slide just for a second to point out one thing. I did a webinar yesterday in which I spoke on the whole issue of the legalization of marijuana. We're not going to spend any time on that today, but I do want to point out that over the last 10 years, the number of THC being the psychoactive ingredient in marijuana, the number of THC-related traffic fatalities has tripled in the last 10 years in 5 states where they conducted this study. Of those 5 states, 4 of them have legalized marijuana, either for medicinal purposes or for recreational purposes. And so we see that the sort of loosening of the legal parameters on marijuana is already starting to have a negative impact on society. We've been dealing with that on an ongoing basis for many, many years when it comes to alcohol abuse. We're perhaps entering a new era in which we're going to compound the issue, at least in states where marijuana has been legalized, either for medicinal purposes or for recreational purposes, going forward. And just in case you're not aware, Colorado, Washington, Oregon, Alaska, 4 states, plus the District of Columbia, have all legalized marijuana generally, period. It's legal to use marijuana in those 4 states plus the district. 23 states have legalized marijuana for medicinal purposes, in addition to perhaps recreational drug use. Now, 80% of offenders abuse drugs or alcohol. Nearly 50% of jail and prison inmates are clinically addicted. So obviously you're dealing with people who truly have a problem with alcohol. It's not a casual thing. They're not, just simply a user. They're not probably even simply a binge drinker, but they're a heavy alcohol user all the way to addiction. And imprisonment alone, a lot of people outside of the criminal justice profession may not realize this, but imprisonment alone has proven to have very little effect or a reduced effect on eliminating an individual's problem with drugs and alcohol. 60 to 80% of drug abusers commit a new crime after release from prison, typically a drug-driven type of crime, and about 95% return to using drugs or abusing drugs after they're released from prison. Very astounding statistics. General public probably not very aware of that. Now we've set the table. So with all of that in mind, and hopefully those statistics will be helpful to you, after today's webinar, as you put together presentations of your own, as you make the case for the budgets that you need for ongoing alcohol testing programs. Alcohol testing, alcohol screening has proven to be a very effective way to deal with that part of the substance abuse problem that exists in our country. In the criminal justice field, in treatment as a way of holding people accountable for their behavior, accountable to their commitments, accountable to the requirements that may be placed on them by the legal system. And outside of the criminal justice profession and the treatment profession, we deal with this all the time in the workplace, where the U.S. Department of Transportation requires random alcohol testing of people in certain safety-sensitive transportation occupations. And so alcohol testing's been around a long time. It's very common in certain sort of markets, if you will, for screening and testing, the workplace being one, but certainly probably even more so in the criminal justice field. And there are lots of different ways to do alcohol testing, as I mentioned earlier. EtG is one of them. We're going to talk about that in a minute. But as sort of a lead into that, let's review the kind of traditional alcohol testing methods that are out there. And I put them in bold here. There's testing blood, there's testing breath, saliva, and urine. I'm going to talk about each one of these in just sort of brief detail. Blood is, when you talk to the really smart people in the drug and alcohol testing industry, I always like to call them the smart people, the scientists, the people who are, sort of on that side of the issue. They'll often refer to blood as the gold standard for detecting drugs or alcohol in an individual system. The problem with blood, of course, is that it's very invasive, no question about that. It's time-consuming. It requires the services of a professionally trained individual, but it's also expensive. It may be obviously the only way to ascertain an alcohol content level, or the most effective way in a post-mortem situation, but on a day-to-day basis, required in some circumstances, yes, I understand, but by and large impractical under most circumstances. The gold standard, but not commonly used. Now, saliva, a little bit of a different story there. Saliva is typically a screen-only type of test, so it's not an evidentiary test, so to speak. You're usually dealing with a disposable, one-time use product. It's less expensive, yes, and it's very common in certain markets like the DOT, the Department of Transportation mandated regulations that I mentioned a couple of slides back. In the workplace industry, disposable, one-time use saliva alcohol screening devices are fairly common. They're less expensive. They're a great way to screen. If the screen's positive, you're going to confirm either, in most cases, with breath. It, as I said, can't produce an evidentiary result, so you have to confirm those positives with another testing method, either an evidentiary breath test or with a blood test. Urine is actually far more common than most people may realize for alcohol testing. Because urine is the most common specimen used for drug testing, it's not the only one, obviously. There's hair and there's oral fluid, which are becoming very popular. But it is probably still the most common, the most popular testing method for drugs. I know in the workplace market, perhaps also in treatment, criminal justice, there are organizations that will ask their laboratory to go ahead and test a urine sample that's going into the lab for a drug test and screen it also for alcohol. The problem is there's limitations with urine testing. Well, it's convenient in that respect, as the scenario I just described. It's not a very stable medium for detecting urine, and that's due to what's called the fermentation process. That occurs because of the occurrence of glucose in urine. So this will sometimes lead to false positive results. That's when it's a level that appears to be higher than they really are. The ethanol evaporates in the system, and somewhat quickly, relatively quickly, certainly as compared to EtG, which I'm about to launch into here in a couple of slides. And so the window of detection is shorter. It can be somewhere between 8 to 12 hours, or it could be less than that. A negative result does not necessarily mean the individual was not using alcohol, only that the usage was not very recent. Depending on what your purpose is for your alcohol testing program, that may be exactly what you want. As I'm often heard to say, all alcohol testing methods are good. I'm a proponent of breath, saliva, even urine under some circumstances. If it's done right, if you're using the right kind of product, if you're using it in the right way, and if with the limitations that apply to a particular testing method, if those limitations do not interfere with you achieving the objectives that you have for that particular testing program, then go with that one. Go with the one that has the shorter window of detection, or go with the one that's a little bit more expensive because all the other benefits actually line up better with your needs. But sometimes that's not the case. Sometimes you want a larger window of detection. You're not as concerned with very recent usage, but you're looking more for maybe a 2-day look back into somebody's behavior. And so in those cases, you're probably not going to want to go with the urine test. Might not even want to go with breath, but breath is probably the most common type of testing for alcohol. Certainly in the workplace market it is. And there's 2 basic types of breath tests. There's evidentiary breath testing instrument devices, sometimes referred to as EBTs. And then there's also non-evidentiary breath screening devices that are single-use devices typically. An EBT can be mobile. It can be easily accessible depending on whether you're doing it yourself and you've invested in the device, in the instrument, or you may be working through a hospital, a clinic, or some other type of collection facility where an EBT is being maintained on site. It does require the operator to be trained, and if the individual is not trained, you don't really have a guarantee of what you're getting, but there are some advantages to it. Now, EBTs also have to be calibrated. These instruments have to be calibrated to make sure that they're rendering an accurate result. This is not necessarily the case with the non-evidentiary devices, but with the evidentiary breath testing devices, the EBTs, you're going to have that issue to take care of, and you can be trained to do that as well. If you are using a non-evidentiary breath test, you want to make sure that you confirm the result either with blood or with an evidentiary breath alcohol test device, an EBT. When considering, and this is a little bit, harkening back to some of the requirements that exist in the workplace market. When considering an EBT, just know that there is something called the conforming products list. It is a list of devices, alcohol screening devices, that have been approved for use by the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration, by NHTSA. And if you're in the drug testing world, or excuse me, in the workplace market, and you're mandated to do alcohol testing under the DOT regulations, you must use a device off of the conforming products list, the CPL. But even if you're not, it's a good place to look, because you'll find it's not the only place to look. It's not an exclusive. I don't mean to say it that way, but it's a good place to start. Okay, so we've looked at blood, we've looked at breath, we've looked at saliva, and we've looked at urine. They have their strengths, certainly, and we could do an entire webinar presentation on any one of those different types of testing methods. Today, the topic is EtG, so let's launch into that. An alcohol test for ethyl glucuronide, or EtG, is a biomarker test, and I'm going to explain all of these terms here in a minute, that can detect the presence of ethyl glucuronide in blood, in urine, in oral fluid, in a wide variety, even in hair, in a hair sample. And it offers a wider window of detection. I'm going to take you through all of that here in a second. Okay. That's one of the reasons why EtG testing, I think, is becoming more popular in certain markets for alcohol testing, criminal justice, treatment, even in some workplace situations. A lab-based EtG test is, I'm not going to say popular or common, but we're seeing more interest in it. And we're going to talk about rapid EtG more specifically here in a minute. And I'm going to go through all your common questions, but if you have any questions, please, enter them in the Q&A section there on the screen in front of you, and I'm going to get to as many as I can. If there are any that I don't get to today, I'll get to them. Even if I have to send you a private email to answer your question, I'll get to those. One of the things that gets asked often about EtG is, Bill, you say the window of detection is wider with EtG than, say, with breath or saliva. What do you mean by that? Well, it depends on a lot of things. What the cutoff level is a critical factor in determining what the window of detection is. So most experts, especially in the criminal justice field, have concluded that 500 nanograms per milliliter is the appropriate cutoff. It's the just right cutoff, sometimes referred to as the Goldilocks cutoff. It's the just right cutoff level for being able to detect EtG, the specific biomarker, without at a lower cutoff level, maybe running into a false positive that's caused by hand sanitizers or some other external factor. And at that 500 cutoff level, you're going to be able to have a window of detection of somewhere between, well, let's say up to 48 to 50 hours. A lot of factors come into play. As you know, if you're testing people for alcohol, a lot of factors come into play, right? How much alcohol did they use? How about the size of the individual? What type of alcohol was consumed, et cetera? And so all of these things factor into, sort of estimating the window of detection. But all things being equal, you're looking at, with EtG, at a 500 cutoff level, you're looking at somewhere up to about 40 to 50 hours. It could be less. But and this is one of the questions that gets asked a lot, which is, I thought it was 80 hours. And it can be 80 hours if you use, say, a 100 nanogram per milliliter cutoff level, but then you significantly increase the possibility of getting these false positives based on external factors. And I've got some slides coming up on that. I've got some fascinating slides on that very subject towards the end of today's presentation. So hang in till the very end. I've got some great stuff to share with you on that. Now, if you're using a rapid ETG, you get a positive, you're going to want to confirm. And confirmation is available for ETG with your traditional GCMS, gas chromatography mass spectrometry, but you might want to do an LCMS or an LCMS-MS, okay? And the possibility of false positives due to the fermentation process that is associated with urine testing is eliminated altogether with ETG. So you don't have that possibility with ETG. ETG has been around for a long time, dating back to the 1950s, really sort of started catching on as a test, as an alcohol marker in the early 2000s. There's some names of individuals there that were instrumental in this and where that took place. But basically, around 2001, there in that time frame, they were able to demonstrate that ETG was a more sensitive, reliable indicator, both for drinking as well as for abstinence when compared to testing for urine. And I know that's important in the criminal justice field and in treatment. I mentioned SAMHSA earlier, the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration. They put out an advisory in 2012. I failed to put the URL on for this. I apologize. I can get that for you, though, if you want to be. You can probably just Google it this way, even using maybe the headline that you see there in the advisory. But I'll get that URL, and I'll have Jessica send that out as part of the follow-up to today's webinar. But you find a lot of fascinating information in this SAMHSA advisory. And I've got some of it found here. Some of it, this is a repeat of some information that's on another slide. But it's interesting because it sort of highlights the most important things that you're going to want to know about ETG testing, okay? It's a metabolite of ethyl alcohol formed in the body by the glucuronation. I was struggling with that word earlier. Adation following exposure to ethanol. So ethanol is found in alcoholic beverages, and if ethanol is present, then it's a unique biomarker that's going to be able to detect whether that is present in that individual's, let's say, urine sample. And if it's not, then the individual was not drinking. They don't have that in their system. And as I mentioned, it's a unique biomarker for alcohol use. Ethanol produced by the liver. The detection time with ETG, I told you about the up to 48 to 50 hours, but that's about 5 to 7 times wider of a window of detection than most alcohol testing methods. Okay? Important to know, though, it's not going to necessarily, and I've got a window of detection chart coming up, it's not going to show, immediately after somebody's consumed alcohol. But if they've got alcohol in their system, that ETG test is going to be able to detect the presence of ethanol in that individual system. And you're going to be able to detect that for a wider period of time compared to traditional alcohol testing methods. Okay? ETG is not detected in the urine of an abstinent subject. In other words, if the person's not drinking, then ETG will not be detected in their urine sample. And oftentimes that's the bottom line. That's what you're looking for. Now, this is a chart right out of that SAMHSA advisory, and it's a little bit difficult to see, and I've applied the red highlighting here, which probably sort of hides what the main points I want to make here. But I want to clarify a couple of things as it pertains to this chart. So if you go back and you look at that SAMHSA advisory, you see the biomarkers in that left column there. And then you see screening for heavy drinking, identify relapse, especially too heavy drinking, and then the time to return to normal with abstinence, okay? So in other words, how long until it is out of the individual system and it's not going to be detected? Well, go to that second line down, that's ETG, ETS, and go over to the 1 to 3 days. So that sounds like 24 to 76 hours, right, or 72 hours. Well, again, it depends on the cutoff level. So if you're out there in today's audience, and you've heard people say with ETG you get an 80-hour window of detection, again, that's possible, as long as you understand that you've got to lower the cutoff level to get to that 80 hours, to get beyond the say 48 hours. And you run the risk of, external factors may be producing a false positive. And I've got some information coming up on that. I just wanted to point this out. I've got a better chart coming up on the next slide, but I just wanted to point this out just in case you see that and you think back to this webinar, you're listening to the webinar later, you're thinking, I thought he said up to 48 to 50 hours. I did say that. This says 1 to 3 days, but again, it depends on the cutoff level and a number of other factors, okay? Now, here's a window of detection chart that visually shows, blood, saliva, breath, urine, and then EtG there at the bottom. And so typically with blood, with saliva, with breath and urine, you're looking at somewhere, around short of 10 hours, a little past 10 hours, okay? With EtG, you're going to be, out there a ways. It's kind of like hair testing with drug testing. That window of detection is, going to be up to about, 90 days. Whereas with urine, drug testing is going to be maybe in the 2 to 4 day range. Well, hair testing looks like it's got a much wider window of detection for drug testing, and it does. Same is true with urine EtG. You're going to be out there at that 500 nanogram per milliliter cutoff level. You're going to be out there somewhere up to about 48 to 50 hours. You're not going to get up to 80 hours with a 500 cutoff, okay? But you may not want a 500 cutoff, okay? And again, these are all things that you can discuss with the provider of your product, whether it's lab or rapid. Now, EtG can be tested in a laboratory, of course, but also, as Casey was mentioning in the beginning of today's presentation, they do have a rapid EtG result available. And there are advantages to having a rapid test, just like there are with rapid drug testing, or what we call point of collection or point of care drug testing. Being able to get that result immediately puts you as a criminal justice professional or as a treatment professional in a position to be able to confront somebody with the result right on the spot without having to wait a day or two to get the result back. The abstinence monitoring tool angle of the rapid EtG test could be valuable to you. If it is, you may want to consider this. If not, then maybe you want to stick with lab-based testing, but you may still want to consider EtG. EtG is only evident, again, I made this point earlier, when ethanol is ingested and not produced as a result of fermentation. Okay, it's stable in stored samples, not volatile, and that longer window of detection could be what you're looking for in your program. Let's compare rapid EtG to breathalyzers. And again, as I do this, I'm a fan of both. So I don't really sort of have a horse in this race. I like both testing methods, but again, it depends on what you're looking for. What are the objectives of your alcohol testing program? So right off the bat, bullet across to bullet, with the rapid EtG, you're going to get that longer window of detection. I've sort of said it a million times already, up to about 50 hours at that 500 nanogram per milliliter cutoff level. With breathalyzer, you're going to have a shorter window of detection, typically less than 10 hours. Again, it depends on what you're looking for, right? There is calibration required, as I mentioned. There's mouthpieces that you have to purchase with a breathalyzer. There is no calibration required, obviously, with the rapid EtG. It's a single-use disposable item. I'm going to show you a picture here in a second. With the rapid EtG, it can be used to detect recent alcohol consumption, but it's really for that longer window that you're looking for, okay? With breath, you're going to have that recent use detection ability that may be, the advantage that you're looking for, maybe the benefit you're looking for. You're still going to get that with rapid EtG. And especially, as I mentioned earlier, you've got the ability to confront somebody with an instant result with rapid EtG and also with the breathalyzer. And you can see the other ones that are on the screen there. With the breathalyzer, I did underscore the fact that it measures, quote unquote, impairment. Obviously, impairment is can be something that you define by a certain type of blood alcohol content level, depending on your program. But it's one of the things that is sort of accepted in the world of screening. Now, this is the rapid EtG device, and the example I'm using obviously is from Premier Biotech. Not to promote their product necessarily, but obviously we do appreciate the fact that they're sponsoring today's webinar. But I just want to point out what it looks like. You may be looking at this and think, well, this looks like something I've used for drug testing before. Yeah, it's kind of a similar type of look, similar type of process. You see here that this is with their particular product, but this is something you really need to know. This is important if you're going to use any type of instant testing devices. You know, how easy is it to be able to read the result? So in this particular case, when those lines show up, that's the indication that it's a negative result. So as soon as the lines show up, then you know you've got a negative. If after let me go back here and just point out a couple of things here. So you dip the device into the urine for 15 seconds, and then you replace the lid. The negative is available as soon as the fact that that you get the lines, right? You're going to be able to read a positive result in about 5 minutes, and it's going to remain stable for about 2 hours. So in the middle of this picture here, you're seeing what a positive looks like. On the far right, you're seeing what an invalid result looks like. And you're going to be able to get that result fairly quickly, okay, and then be able to act upon it. Now, this is a slide that I'm not going to go into a lot of detail on, but I do want to point out the sensitivity and the specificity that are shown there on the slide. This is important because you want to be able to use a testing system that has similar sensitivity and specificity ratings. 96% in this case for sensitivity, over 98% for specificity. Okay, so one of the things I like to do, whether I'm doing a presentation on alcohol testing or drug testing, is kind of point out some of the basic things that you want to look for when you're either getting a sales pitch from a salesperson for whatever the product may be, or whether you're reading the product insert, the package insert, for the product that you've purchased. You want to look for certain things, and so you want to look and see what it says in terms of the sensitivity and the specificity. And now, I'm kind of rushing through this because I can see I'm a little bit off schedule here in order to get to all of your questions today. But I do want to take you through some studies that were done to deal with certain issues like mouthwash and beer and certain other sort of inhalation, certain other external factors that can affect the result of an alcohol test. So this was a study that was done with mouthwash. A whole bottle of mouthwash, 39 samples, the highest EtG concentration was 300 nanograms per milliliter. Remember, I was talking earlier about 500 nanograms per milliliter being sort of the Goldilocks level, the just right level. And so you can see even with that much exposure to mouthwash, you're looking at an EtG of about 300 nanogram per milliliter level. 30 seconds with mouthwash 3 times a day for 5 days, 55 total samples in this study, no EtG concentration above 120 nanograms per milliliter. 30 seconds every hour for 8 hours, you got a high of 336 nanograms per milliliter. And the mouthwash 27%, and this was the original Listerine product, 4 times daily for 4 days. The highest EtG rating that we got was 173 nanograms per milliliter. Again, this underscores, because you're going to hear this as you start to really endeavor, go on a very serious endeavor to find out whether or not EtG is right for you. You're going to hear some of these things like mouthwash. And this is a study that shows that if you're using a product with a cutoff level somewhere in the range of 500, then you're really not going to have a problem with mouthwash. That's just not an excuse that's going to hold water, so to speak. Hand sanitizer, you're going to hear this as well. Study was done using a hand sanitizer every 15 minutes for 8 hours. Now, if you're like me and you use a hand sanitizer every now and then, it's not every 15 minutes for 8 hours, right? You may use it maybe a couple times a day. If you're shaking hands a lot, dealing with people, you may be using it, a lot more than that. Well, in this particular study, with using it every 15 minutes for 8 hours, the highest EtG we got was 69 nanograms per milliliter. okay? Once every 8 hours, 103 nanograms per milliliter. So we're really not talking about any type of a serious concern when it comes to hand sanitizers triggering a false positive if you're at that 500 nanogram per milliliter cutoff level. Inhalation. For this study, 500 milliliters of ethanol was placed in a beaker, swirled around to make sure that the sides got, wet with the ethanol to create a vaporization. Now, the beaker was held up to the individual's nose, and they were asked to take one deep respiration of the vapor every 5 minutes for an hour. And even at that, the highest EtG we got was 124 nanograms per milliliter. Again, not really a serious concern and well below the 500 nanograms. But let me just point out that if you were at 100 nanograms per milliliter, then, you would be a little bit more in that danger zone there, okay? Here's the really interesting, this is the beer study. Now, I don't drink beer, but they included the actual product that was being used. So some of you may be able to relate to the actual brand product that was being used. This was an individual, a male, 28 years old, 5'11", 255 pounds, 3 beers in 1 hour, and he was using Goose Island India Pale Ale, 5.9% alcohol. He was tested with a breathalyzer, with 2 different breathalyzers, right? A saliva, a urine, an EtG lateral flow, and then a commercial lab EIE EtG test. So the lab test. And okay, so that's our subject, and this is what he was tested with. And I'm going to take you through this scenario about 3 different times. Okay. With the first breathalyzer, positive after 20 minutes or up to 6 hours. So the window of detection opened up 20 minutes after ingestion and lasted for about 6 hours. With the second breathalyzer, again, the window of detection opened up after about 20 minutes and stayed for about 5 hours. The saliva test, again, 20 minutes on the front end, up to about 4 hours and 20 minutes on the back end, testing positive. With urine, positive after 1 hour, but remained positive for about 5 hours. So you can see the window of detection in a real-world scenario with this individual consuming just that much beer. EtG, the window of detection opened up after about an hour and a half and remained open for about 27 hours. With the lab test, all results were comparable to the EtG lateral flow that right above it there. And it gives you a little idea on the comparison with beer. Now, and this is maybe a way to visualize it here. You see, just like we saw on the other window of detection chart a little earlier, the EtG line, much broader, much longer, a much wider window of detection than we would see with other testing methods. And based on what we've talked about here today, that's what we would expect. Now, go to the next one. This is the liquor study. A male, again, 28 years old, 5'11", 255 pounds, consumes 4 cocktails over 2 hours. He was actually drinking rum and Coke, a 4-ounce Coke, 1.5 ounces of Captain Morgan on ice. Okay, so you got all the details. Again, the same testing devices and methods were applied. With the first breathalyzer, he was positive after 30 minutes for up to 4.5 hours, or almost 4.5 hours, 4.3 hours. With the second breathalyzer, again, after 30 minutes, up to 4.3 hours. With saliva, there was a lag time of about an hour, and the window of detection was also up to 4.3 hours. With urine, 1.3 hours before detectable, but up to about 4 hours, a tighter window of detection with urine. With EtG, he was positive after 3 hours and remained positive for up to 27 hours. With EIA, comparable to the EtG lateral flow. Okay. And you see the comparison with this horizontal chart. Down at the bottom there, just to point out, that's number of hours, not no hours. Now let's look at just a couple of concluding slides, and then I can get to your questions. What to look for in a lab-based test. Now, I said at the outset, EtG is detectable in saliva or oral fluid, in urine, in hair, in blood, and it can be tested for directly in the laboratory or as a rapid result test. Both, viable ways to go depending on what your needs are. Questions to ask if you're looking at lab-based testing. Does the lab you deal with have the capability of testing for EtG? And very importantly, as we've discussed throughout this presentation, what is the cutoff level being used? What's the turnaround time before you receive a result if you're working directly through a laboratory? What is the process for collecting a sample and transport? And what precautions does the lab take to avoid cross-reaction with products that contain alcohol, such as mouthwash or hand sanitizers, as we just reviewed? What precautions does the lab take to avoid cross-reaction with the hand sanitizers? And is there any interference from other drugs? So those are all fair questions to ask, and any lab that you deal with is going to be able to answer those questions for you. If it's a lab that deals with EtG, they're going to have all of these questions, answers for all of these questions. What to look for in a rapid result device? Now, and obviously this is a Premier Biotech presentation, sponsored presentation today, and they do have the rapid result EtG device. But as you do a little bit of research, if you happen on to other devices, other companies that provide rapid EtG, or if you're dealing with Premier Biotech, I'm the one who made up these questions. How fast can you see the result? And I might add, how easy is it to see the result? And very importantly, again, what is the cutoff level being tested? You've got to know that, and what's the sensitivity and specificity percentages of the device that you are considering using. That's important as well. Remember, the sensitivity and the specificity are important factors. You're going to either find that information on the package insert, or you can ask your sales rep, and he or she should be able to tell you that. What's the shelf life from the date of manufacture? It depends on how much of the product that you purchase and how quickly you're going to use it as to whether or not the shelf life is important to you. But if a product's been sitting around somewhere for some period of time from the date of manufacture, you want to know, how much longer that product has shelf life. How long will a positive drug test remain stable? Or not a drug test, but an EtG result will remain stable. As we talked about earlier, you're going to, with the example that I showed you, you're looking at about 2 hours. What about cross-reaction with mouthwash, hand sanitizers, other drugs? All goes back to the studies that I showed you earlier when we did the beer, the liquor, the hand sanitizer, the inhalation, etc. These are all important things to know, because if you're going to switch to EtG, you do get some of the advantages that we've talked about, the longer window of detection, but again, that depends on the cutoff level that's being used. And with alcohol testing, it's always a factor. What about the individual that I'm testing? What's their, rate of usage? And other factors that come into play, the individual's height, the individual's body weight, all come in and play a role in there. But when you get right down to it, it's a matter of what is this testing method capable of doing. If you're looking for an instant result, you're looking for an instant testing device or a breath testing device, perhaps. If you're looking for the stability of a lab result, you may want to start with an instant result, and then, of course, always any positives that you get with that instant result, you're going to want to confirm at the laboratory, basing your final decisions perhaps on a lab-based confirmation result. And again, a lot of factors come into play. You're going to want to ask these kinds of questions when you're looking at EtG. I've been involved in a number of EtG presentations this year and last year, and the level of interest, I will say, has increased over the last, say, 2 to 3 years. And most of the presentations, not all of them, but I would say about 60% of the presentations I do are to workplace audiences, employers. And I'm always surprised that there seems to be growing interest in that particular market. I'm not surprised anymore, but I was in the beginning. This may be a good fit, however, automatically, when you think about the things that you deal with in the criminal justice field as a treatment professional or as a criminal justice professional, this may be a good fit for what you do, the programs that you have your clients in, as to, you know, being able to kind of keep them honest and making sure that they're doing the things that they've either been obligated legally to do or that they've committed to doing. Again, I harken back to some of the statistics at the very beginning in terms of rates of substance abuse, and particularly in certain occupations, as some of your clients are going through sort of a, you know, some type of a job program where they may be working in construction, they may be working in food services, and it's good for you to know as the person dealing with that individual that, you know, in certain occupations, they may be exposed at a higher rate to individuals who are heavy alcohol users, maybe even addicted to alcohol. And so EtG can play a role there because of that wider window of detection of up to about 48 to 50 hours. Anyway, covered a lot of material, and it took a little bit longer, but I do have time for a few questions. And I've got a couple here I'm looking at. I'm going to try to read these as you know, on the screen here, and we've got quite a few. So I may not be able to get to all of these in the next couple of hours. And let me just also point out, because as I'm scanning through, I see one individual said they couldn't hear the presentation. This presentation has been recorded, and you as an attendee, as a registrant, will receive the information to access the recording as well as the slides. And I believe Premier Biotech is actually going to put out a paper on this today's webinar as well, and I'm sure that they will tell you about that. Here's the same question. I've kind of dealt with this, beat this horse pretty good, but an individual sent in a question here. I heard EtG has 80-hour window of detection, and you're saying it's 50 hours having a 50-hour window of detection. You know, what's the difference? And of course, the big difference is the cutoff level. And so at the 500 nanogram per milliliter cutoff level, you're looking at a detection rate there, or a window of detection, I should say, of up to 48 to 50 hours. I think, you know, a lot of you heard me say that earlier. Let me go to another question, but it's important. Obviously, somebody, you know, maybe didn't catch that. That is an important factor. If you're out there listening to some of the information about EtG, you may have heard that 80-hour window of detection. And yes, you can get that if you go with a lower nanogram per milliliter rating, and that may be what you want. Okay, you may want that wider window of detection, but you just have to be concerned about any exposure to or false positives that may be the result of external factors. Here's another question. If using a rapid EtG test, can it be confirmed at a laboratory? And the answer to that is yeah, absolutely. In fact, you're going to want to confirm a positive in most instances through a laboratory. EtG, you can detect EtG with a rapid result device, but you know the most common method is through the laboratory. And as I mentioned on one of the slides, you've got GCMS, you've got LCMS or LCMS as options for you. So the answer to that question is absolutely yes, and it may be very advisable under certain circumstances. A few more questions in here on, here's another one on the cutoff level. I think I've covered that. Here's the window of detection. I've covered that. So most of the questions kind of going towards the window of detection. I think, you know, if you're, I'm just scanning through these. I apologize that I'm hemming and hawing just a little bit, but I'm seeing some of these questions here for the first time. Let's see. Oh, here's somebody saying, you mentioned lab and POCT. Does that mean that you should confirm in a lab? Does that mean the POCT device is not as sensitive as a lab EtG screen? No, that's not what I meant there at all. I think the best practice for the lab is, you know, well, you talk to your lab and you find out what cutoff level they're testing at in the lab. Compare it to whatever the cutoff level may be for the POCT or the rapid device that you're looking at using. Again, I've been sort of promoting the 500 nanogram per milliliter, but again, you may be dealing with a provider that's using a lower cutoff level, and you just need to make sure you go back to some of those slides that I showed you about hand sanitizers and things like that. You just make sure that you're in the safe zone of where you want to be. But, you know, I kind of called it the Goldilocks cutoff level, which is, you know, sort of just right, because there are different cutoff levels that you can use. I think it comes back also to the whole issue of sensitivity and specificity. So you want to go back and you want to look at those percentages and make sure they're solidly up there in the mid to high 90% range. Anyways, I notice I'm out of time. I apologize that I'm not able to get to all of these questions, but some really good questions were submitted. If you have any questions at all, please feel free to, you've got my contact information there. You can obviously contact Premier Biotech directly if you'd like to. We'd like to thank Premier Biotech for sponsoring today's webinar, and that concludes the formal part of the presentation. If you'll stay on the line for just a few more minutes, Jessica Polk will come back on and tell you how you can access this information.
Thank you, Bill. And on behalf of Premier Biotech, we hope that you have found today's presentation informative and helpful. This presentation was recorded, and you will receive instructions informing you how to access the recording. Thank you for your attendance. This concludes today's webinar.